You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. I almost just said Sports Media Group. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. It's the middle of the week. It's all very confusing. I do have good news on my end. Good to close on the house. That is happening a week from today. So very excited. 2 weeks, the move-in date. And huge props to Michael Coriasso from Rocket Mortgage. If you are trying to seal the deal, give him a call. Reach out to me. I'll give you his number. And Charlie Hoover as well, who I've mentioned multiple times. But Michael Coriasso made the seeming impossible happen, and all glory to God with the extenuating circumstances that had to be overcome. Anyway, we are going to get into the fact that Michigan got yet another commitment today. This time, it's an offensive lineman, but again from Ohio, in Ben Roebuck. And don't let the Ohio State people fool you. Even though he did not have an offer from Ohio State, they were listed as warm on his profile on 24/7 Sports. But if you go to the message boards, they'll sit there and be like, now, neither of these guys had Ohio State offers, but they're like, we just lost out on the two top offensive linemen in the state. And for all of the star gazing and things that happens, I mean, Michigan's just proven the last 2 years it doesn't always matter, at least in the rivalry. Sometimes it's more important to have those guys that are going to step up and really, take you down, like that it's personal for them. That's what Michigan's needed more in this rivalry. I think that's part of what the turnaround has been, is guys who made it personal. Aiden Hutchinson made it personal, I think that was kind of where it all started. So Michigan continues to raid Ohio, this time Lakewood, St. Edward. That's not exactly a Michigan feeder school. It's been quite the opposite. It's not quite as insane as going into Glenville and getting a guy, but I mean, getting a guy out of Moeller kind of was, so it's and I'm talking, of course, about Jordan Marshall. So it's what Michigan's continuing to do is impressive on the trail. And Roebuck, he's a 4-star according to Rivals, a 3-star according to everyone else, the 15th or 12th rated, depending on if you're looking at the composite or 24/7 Sports. Proper guy in the state of Ohio, the 455 overall in the composite. I'm curious, who are the other guys in Ohio? Right now, Ohio's got the number 5 guy. Michigan's got the number 3 in Ohio, the number 11 in Luke Hamilton, the number 14 in Ted Hammond, and now Ben Roebuck, number 15. So they've got 4 commits in the state of Ohio right now. Ohio State also has number 18. And so they've got 5 and 18. 5 is Garrett Stover, who's the brother of Cade Stover, who you might remember from having a surefire touchdown knocked out of his hands by Mike Sainristil. Now they are trending for Bryce West out of the aforementioned Glenville, Cleveland, Ohio, the Ted Ginn Buckeye factory. And they're also trending for number 2 in Aaron Scott. But both of those guys are strongly considering Michigan. And what you're starting to see is the tide turning for you old school MGO blog forum people. The jerseys are selling in Ohio. It's a good start. I know I butchered that. That was basically became a meme on MGO blog in the early 2010s. Pocus turned the tide in the rivalry. Except for that is really the case. If Michigan wins this year, which I expect them to, given barring again injuries, if Michigan can win, it's at home. None of these guys on the Ohio State roster really will know what it's like to beat Michigan. Michigan's They haven't beaten Michigan in 1,202 days. So we're getting to that point where it's going to be the opposite of what used to happen, right? You've seen so many Michigan games where Michigan has the advantage for 3 quarters, maybe 3.5 quarters, and then something happens and Ohio State runs away with it. I mean, in the Jim Harbaugh era alone, you're looking at 2016, 2017, not 2018 or 2019, but I mean, those games were more in striking distance than you'd think, given the lopsided score. More so 2019, right? Because 2019, Hassan Haskins sees the hole. We have ourselves a ball game. Defense couldn't stop them, though. And then, obviously, they've won the last 2. But even before that, 2014, 2013, 2012, Michigan has been in that game more often than not, and then suddenly something else changes, right? Something Ohio State players know that they're supposed to win, Michigan players turtle, and that's not going to happen anymore, or at least it shouldn't happen anymore, because we saw kind of the opposite happen this last year, where Ohio State turtled. And again, that was a game when if Ohio State would have made a couple more plays, they could have either been in it or won the game. It was very similar to 2018 and 2019, where you look at the score and you're like, phew. But if you watch the game, you know that you didn't feel safe until at least halfway through the fourth quarter, right? Like the moment that things started feeling safe was literally halfway through the fourth quarter. Trying to cut the score to 4 was the Cade Stover touchdown that could have been. And it didn't happen that way. So, I digress here a lot because I'm just kind of going back over the history of this all. But Michigan is in a position where they can really get a stranglehold on the rivalry. Because if you make this class look the way like it's starting to look, if you can maybe even close on one of those other guys, Bryce West or Aaron Scott, if you can close on one more of those guys, they're probably going to close on Brian Robinson, the number 4 guy. But if you can make a statement, more so with Bryce West, which again, probably not going to happen, but when you get a guy like Jordan Marshall in the class, it changes things. Certainly, especially because signing day is not till December, which also means Michigan's got to keep up its end of the bargain, has to keep recruiting these guys, has to win in November, has to win overall. You could see a path where suddenly maybe even a guy committed to Ohio State is like, yeah, about that. You know what? Because you're changing hearts and minds here. Ben Roebuck came out and said, after his commitment today, I grew up an Ohio State fan, but as I grew older, I realized Michigan is where it's at. You just have to make people see that. Make recruits see that. And that's how you do it. That's how you change things and make things different. So Michigan's up to number 3, I believe, in the 24/7 Sports rankings now. Let's take a look just to be sure. So yeah, number 3, behind only Georgia and LSU. And the ranking is far behind Georgia overall, as well as by the average ranking, because Georgia's got 10 commits and 3 of them are 5 stars and 1 of them's a 3-star. Michigan's got 6 4-stars and 3 3-stars. But for once, you look up and down this list and it's not like Michigan's like really, it's strictly because of numbers, because sometimes we see that, right? Just to be honest about it. Sometimes you're like, oh, Michigan's ranked pretty good, and it's because they've got 27 commits to 20, other people have 20 when it's all is written. And it's not the highest, right? Like Notre Dame's behind Michigan. They have 1 less recruit, but they have a higher average star rating. 7 4-stars and 1 3-star. Florida State's slightly above Michigan, same amount of commits. South Carolina's a little bit ahead of Michigan, but with 5 commits, all 4 stars. So, but like Michigan's hanging right in there. LSU's ahead of them with 2 more commits. Hence their number's going to be much higher. Only 0.06 points ahead of Michigan in the average the average ranking. And this is the good news for this is going to go up because right now, a lot of the guys that Michigan's trending for are all 4 stars. Ben Roebuck was kind of the last 3-star, not the last 3-star. There's some other 3 stars in there that are kind of those Miles Pollard, Jaden McBurrows types where not saying cornerbacks, but they're those ones that are kind of sitting there with a bunch of offers that everybody wants. I'm talking about like Amarian Stewart and another name escapes me. But guys who are highly thought of, but don't necessarily have the recruiting ranking, you know? All right. Just looked at the time. We are going to continue on momentarily with this discussion, and we'll go from there. Before we do that, the tournament is heating up, resumes tomorrow, I believe, tomorrow. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay, so don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, let's continue on with this discussion of the things, this rivalry turning. I mean, Michigan's got 4 commits now out of the state of Ohio. Again, only one has an Ohio State offer. Even Brian Robinson, the number 4 guy. I feel like Ohio State, they might be doing what Michigan tends to do sometimes with their in-state of like, we don't need to offer this guy because he's an Ohio guy and we can come in and get him whenever we want him. Michigan does that, certainly in the state of Michigan. But I feel like when it's the other side of the rivalry, there's a more likely chance that that's not necessarily going to happen here. So the fact that Michigan's doing what it's doing is extremely impressive here. Michigan has 4 guys from the state of Ohio. Ohio has 2. But granted, Ohio State only has 4 commits in 2024 at the moment. So that is a huge difference, right? Because now you're starting to get into that same kind of territory that MSU was in the mid 2010s. I feel sick saying it that way, but it's where you're starting to get it where younger players looked more favorably on MSU, and they started winning your Will Golston type battles that Michigan would have just kind of ran away with before. Granted, his brother played at Ohio State. Maybe he wasn't going to ever come to Michigan. I don't know. But, and the whole, calling him Tom at the recruiting visit and stuff like that, that certainly didn't help. But Michigan State started actually having some pretty good recruiting classes. And just like a anecdotal evidence of the change was, I remember coming back from Los Angeles and walking around Great Lakes Crossing, and everywhere you looked, everyone was wearing Michigan State gear instead of Michigan gear. And that would have made sense if I wasn't in Auburn Hills, So Michigan has an opportunity to kind of do that same thing with Ohio State. And if you beat them in Ann Arbor, that is kind of not the death knell, but there's almost no way that Ryan Day survives that. Maybe he does if they're 11-0 going into the game, and which they might be. They're 11-0, and then they lose to Michigan, regardless of what Michigan's record is. Certainly, if they go back to the college football playoff, it's kind of hard to say, hey, man, not good enough. But that in Columbus, there's one thing that matters, and it's that. And when you look at the talent that Ohio State has, they're certainly talented, but it's more unproven talent in a lot of ways. Unless suddenly Mayan Williams, who's coming back for another year, and Travion Henderson carry the team. If Kyle McCord ends up being yet another great Ohio State quarterback. However, Michigan finally took down a good Ohio State team. At some point, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they don't have that next great quarterback. And Zuri barks at that, apparently. If that is where what Kyle McCord or Devin White might be, that would be excellent news for Michigan, because usually not every quarterback that a team gets is going to be this like record-breaking trendsetter Heisman Trophy candidate. Now, I understand Ohio State is in the same category as Alabama in a lot of ways. They don't have as many recent national championships, of course. I mean, Ohio State hasn't won a national championship since 2014. They've been in the game, but they haven't won it. But you're getting there. There's at some point. Sorry, I lose my track of my thoughts here. At some point, they're going to put out a guy, and again, to think mid 2010s Michigan State. At some point, you're going to go from Kirk Cousins to Andrew Maxwell, right? Remember the thought, and granted that they that was actually more early in that, but the thought was that Andrew Maxwell was going to be the next step up from that. And lo and behold, 3-star Connor Cook took him a long time to come on, but he did come on eventually. Obviously played well against Michigan as well. At some point, Ohio State is going to fall into that trap. They're going to at some point. Michigan's had kind of the inverse issue in some ways when they've gotten 5-stars. Shane Morris. I hate to throw my guy Shea Patterson in here, but obviously he wasn't. He played like a decent 4-star, I would say, but not a 5-star. It wasn't exactly a match for the offense of what Michigan wanted to do. But at some point, Ohio State's going to go to the next guy, and it's going to be like, man, this guy can't really hack it. Maybe it's not this year. There's an insanely talented roster of wide receivers that are going to help. Say what you will about the running backs. I mean, we didn't see much of Mayan Williams this year because of his injury, and we didn't see any of Travion Henderson, who was in street clothes. Granted, he didn't exactly have the most amazing game in 2021, and Ryan Day stopped going away from him. But if Michigan keeps this mentality going and is this, we're going to bully you up front and we're going to be able to run the ball, and especially now that it's like, okay, J.J. McCarthy, can you take that next step forward? He had a pretty good game last year against Ohio State. Can you take that next step forward? And Michigan can stymie their offense. That could completely change the tide, because then suddenly, despite Ohio State having these big classes that have been really good, you're going to see a lot more of those guys go into Michigan. And you're already kind of starting to see that in some ways, not just the Ohio guys going to Michigan, but just Michigan's recruiting uptick is finally happening. And it sounds like there's more coming, perhaps even this week. Don't ask me who, I don't know. But there's multiple guys. I've got pre-writes on a couple. So that is where it leads to the next thing, is the recruiting aspect, in which Michigan is doing something it hasn't really done in the Jim Harbaugh era. And I was impressed with it. I thought of it just as I went to sit down to do this. We're going to discuss that and finish up here momentarily. All right, so what is Michigan doing different in recruiting? I do want to finish my thought real quick on what I was kind of starting to say there. If you get rid of Ryan Day and you have this great recruiting class, while teams get that uptick from the new coach of it all, and look no further than Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman, suddenly they could be right back in it. But if Michigan beats them again, Michigan's not going to go away. Even if they might go away for like a year, as if JJ's gone and lose a bunch of other guys, don't necessarily have next man up. I don't know. But the good news is Michigan's doing one thing that's very different right now than what I've seen in recent years, and that's they are closing early. They're making the most of this, and they're doing it during spring. Usually Michigan has been, in the Jim Harbaugh era, get a couple now, get like 4 or 5 guys, go into summer, have your big summer visits, have the one big summer visit. I'm not talking about the barbecue, which happens in July. Usually there's the 1 or 2 big summer visits that they have near the end of June, and then make your push. Think of 2019 when you had like 10 guys in 10 days, right? Blake Corum, AJ Henning, all those guys committed in that time frame, right? I remember like Blake Corum committed, I think, when I was at a football camp, an SMSB camp. AJ Henning committed a couple days later or a couple days earlier. I can't remember exactly. I was on a hike. Every day there was someone else. It all kicked off with some guys that didn't end up sticking around. But Aaron Lewis, I believe, was one of them. He was the next year, though, if memory serves. But they had guys like I'm blanking on the name. I remember I went on a hike. I was hiking a lot in the summer of 2019, and they got like 3 commits while I was on this hike. It was like a 15-mile hike, but they got 3 commits that day. And that like kind of kicked off this big one. And when I got home, Jordan Morant, who everyone was saying wasn't going to end up committing to Michigan for a while, ended up committing. So they're doing it different because that was in June. That was in the middle of summer. They're out there getting all of these pledges right now, and it kind of feels like they're going to be getting like 1 a day here for the foreseeable. Some guys, might not make their decisions right away, right? Like Brian Robinson, like, what are you waiting for, man? But what they're doing is they're starting to get more and more guys. I mean, they've got 9 commits at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if we finish next week or we finish the spring game and they've got like 14. I don't know that that's the number that they'll end up having, but it would not surprise me if they got 5 more guys between now and the spring game. So that is something that's completely different because your class at that point is like 2/3 full, right? I mean, depending on what the numbers are. I mean, you always look at the number 25 as kind of being what you're aiming for. You're getting into a place where suddenly there's not a heck of a lot of room. So if you keep that in mind, there's 16 guys that they are probably looking to add. Now, who ends up making that cut? Does Dylan Stewart, did Michigan make a big enough move for Dylan Stewart, the number 1 overall recruit? Or he's according to On3, I believe, he's number 10 in the 24/7 Sports composite, I believe. But you look at like Dylan Stewart, Jaden Davis, Taylor Tatum, who still said to EJ Holland that Michigan's still very much in it. Bryce West, the aforementioned Glenville guy, Brady Prescorn, Aaron Scott, Aaron Childs. Just looking here at the list, Brian Robinson. It would not surprise me if a bulk of those, Blake Frazier, Max Anderson, if a bulk of those guys that I just mentioned end up pledging. And then you have another really good year. And like Dylan Stewart, you're probably not going to get him right now, right? 5 stars tend to take things a little bit further into the process. But have a really good season. You put it in his heart that, he can see himself there. Do I want to go to the college football playoff? Michigan gets NIL working in the way that they're hoping to. That could make a difference. Suddenly you're cooking with gas. So things are changing around here. Anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Tomorrow is going to be the mailbag, most likely. We do have some player availability tomorrow. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy breaking. If we'll likely attack that on Friday. But thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon. Peace.